particular event about social justice and entrepreneurial ministry is because we're aware that the students in our schools are being called to this kind of ministry as a way of transforming the church. And some of us, churches and theological schools, are not as well prepared as we could be to support that, but we want to work on it. So, and when I say support it, I'm talking actually about contextual educators in theological schools. We're working to figure out what are the best ways to support different types of leadership and ministry, and not just traditional models. So we just talked about this briefly with our Methodist contextual educators, and when I said basically the same thing there, they were like, oh yeah, we're seeing that in our schools. So know that the audience here is here to learn from you. And we've asked the speakers to talk about what they're doing, how they learn the skills for that, and to talk honestly about the struggles and joys. And they'll each do a really brief presentation, and then we're going to have time for Q&A afterwards. So, without further ado, I will invite Candise Woods up, who is our first speaker. And she is in the U.S. Air Force Chaplain Candidate Program and an MDiv student at Iliff.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right, bear with me. I'm getting over a little cold, but... So there I was, and I'll move here and not be there. I'm on a C-130 leaving Iraq in about 2010. And my job back then was Special Aviation's combat aviator. So what that means in geeky language is I flew in circles in the sky and provided intel to troops on the ground. So my body has this natural tendency to kind of lean. So if you see me leaning, don't worry, I'm not falling. My body's just been trained and conditioned, and I'm trying to unlearn that behavior, okay? What I want to talk to you today about is a new normal. And when I think of conditioning and people in the ministry field, I know that there are still people that are conditioned today to believe that women, and particularly people of LGBTQ, are incompatible with ministry. And I can't say that I blame them, because I used to fall in that same boat despite falling in both of those categories. But it's funny because I follow a funny God. So one day this calling came upon me from my funny God. And now I am a member in discernment with the United Church of Christ. And I also am, as Dr. Witcher told you, a chaplain candidate with the United States Air Force. What that means is that every summer I get the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with a military chaplain and learn how to balance the lifestyle of military officer as well as pastor and put it in a nice little pretty box. Unfortunately, last year on my first tour, I learned this difficult lesson that there are still people who are conditioned to believe that me living in my true, authentic self in ministry is incompatible and that I don't belong. And it was interesting because there were two feelings. There was that, but there was also this feeling that I couldn't help, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing, supporting people. So those two tensions just stay together. With that, gratefully, I had the support last summer of the Office of Professional Formation, and they were able to offer me two lessons. One, I am not on this journey alone. Never have I been, and perhaps I never will be. And they are with me to tell me that. The second lesson was I need to learn how to stand strong in my strength. Stand in my strength. And what I learned from that is that as hard as I advocate for those around me and other people, I need to advocate for myself just that much more. I understand that military chaplaincy isn't a very popular following in schools like Iliff. However, and that's very complicated, and that's okay. It's growing. But one of the reasons that might be is because people feel that justice work and military ministry are incompatible. In fact, that's a myth. They belong together. For the very nature of just the people that are choosing to serve. They need advocates. In closing, I wanted to just go over these 3 photos. Before I left Iraq, this chaplain came to me, and she said, she was the first chaplain that approached me on this over 180-day tour, and she said to me, "How are you doing?" And she didn't just say it in a way just to have conversation and move on. She really meant sincerely, "How are you doing?" And I never really thought about it. And I keep her card on me to this day because she planted a seed in me. She planted a seed that it didn't matter what her denomination was or what her religion was, that you could still care for people for the sake that they are human beings just like we all are. The second one is I served during a time I don't ask, don't tell. And it was a time in my life where I had to live in an invisible way. That time is behind me. I can't afford to live invisible and silent anymore. This very last photo was during my tour last summer, a moment I'll never forget, a moment of joy. You can see the airmen in the back just exclaiming. This is the first and the only humanist secular meeting that takes place in the Department of Defense. I was offered the opportunity to give an introduction. And I announced that I'm a chaplain candidate, and as they do in their tradition, I offered part of my identity and said that I identify as a queer Christian. And they just exploded in applause. When I talked to leadership afterwards, she shared with me that it was the first time someone on the track to ministry had stopped into one of their meetings, and it meant so much to them that I saw them as people. I simply see them. What they'll never know is how much that moment meant to me, because that was the first time in my military career that I was able to be my full, authentic self, do my ministry, and they also saw me. So with that, I wanted to say thank you to all of you. Now is not a time to be silent. Now is not a time to be invisible. Chaplain, military ministry, and justice work, they go hand in hand. And I want to thank you all for the seeds that you're planting in people and the work that you all do. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. I am Betsy Lay. On most Sunday mornings, you can find me tasting not quite fermented, non-carbonated room temperature samples of beer in a 332 square foot room inside of an abandoned auto shop turned food truck parking garage. And after I do that, I will hand scoop out of a basket wet, hot, sticky grains and put them into a not really strong enough trash bag in the middle of a parking lot next to the smoker-friendly in 30-degree weather while the squirrels mock me on the roof. And then after that, I will mop up some sort of mess I made while I was transferring liquid from one size container to a different size container. And that is my life's work and my life's calling. Because I am the co-founder and head brewer at Lady Justice Brewing. And we are a fully female-owned and operated philanthropic brewery here in Denver. We donate 100% of our profits over costs to Colorado organizations that work with women and girls. And so we got the idea for this, as most people get their ideas, out of pure, utter frustration and one too many beers, right? So I was in AmeriCorps Vista at the time with two friends of mine, Kate and Jen, who is here today. And we were doing capacity building at a nonprofit in Denver. It was in the middle of the recession, and finding funding for the work that we were doing was difficult at best. And so often we would go out for beers after work and lament over our hours of fruitless labor. And then so one day, while doing this, somebody said, you know, I wish all this beer that we were drinking could somehow do some good in the world. And yeah. So that tipsy little idea eventually became Lady Justice Brewing, but at the time, we didn't really think much of it. but 4 years later, Kate, our other co-founder, called me up and she was like, hey, do you remember that one idea we had? Do you want to give it a shot? And at the time, I was at the end of a 10-year career doing youth and family ministry in the United Methodist Church. I was born United Methodist, raised United Methodist. The United Methodist Church helped shape my passion for social justice. My seminary training put me on a career path in the church. And my work in youth ministry helped me learn how to fundraise and build programs and deal with people who drove me completely bonkers. But after years of doing this, the church actually became a burden to me because I was watching myself and pastors and other church staff basically tread water and just try to stay alive. And there was little room for innovation or growth. And then on top of that, identifying as a member of the LGBTQ community, I just couldn't hang around a church that wasn't showing up for me. So I actually had to leave the church in order to do what I thought I was called to be doing. And it seems to be going well so far. We spent a year planning. We did some fundraising. We were able to open our doors in September of 2016. And we knew that we had to start small, like really, 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 really small. We had $20,000. And so we didn't have room for a tap room. We didn't have resources to distribute our beer. So we had to come up with a different model to get our beer out to people. So we came up with what we call a community-supported brewing model. So people pay a membership fee to get our beer, right? And so it's really important for these people to be invested in the work that their consumer dollars are doing, right? So we want the people who buy our beer to want more money to go into their communities. And so it's important to us that our community dictates the work that we do. The sexy way to say this is that we do social entrepreneurship at a micro level. And so the model works, I think, for a few reasons. One, it's tiny. We have the privilege and the ability to take baby steps and to be very small. We also have a product that we didn't have to invent. The beer was already there. People were already spending all their money on it. So really all we had to do was show them an innovative way to buy the product. We just had to show them there are good ways to spend money on beer. And we make a really good product, and you can learn all about it at that table back there. But so the Tiny Tipsy idea has grown into this thing, and we're going to be donating out our second round of grants in April, and we're moving into a bigger space in 2 weeks, and we'll have a tap room later on this year. And the tap room has a floor drain, so that means that I get to dump all my mop water on the floor instead of in the sink. And that's the really exciting part about what I'm doing right now. And I'll still go home smelling like a frat party, but my pants will be dry. So that's my story. Thank you.
Hi, y'all. I'm Becca. I really like carrots. That's a picture of me in my garden. But on the top of my resume, it says food justice advocate, and I put that resume out a lot, I will have to say. And food is really my ministry and my calling. Whether it's cooking dinner for my friends or starting my own small catering business and cooking for the bishop's installation luncheon, or feeding hungry kids at Food Bank of the Rockies. It's really my mission and ministry in life is to have people consume things that I make. It's my connection to others, to the earth, and to the divine. I really thought this was a legitimate form of ministry, but I went home when I was in graduate school here at Iliff. I went home to an undisclosed conference in the South, and I told them about my idea of food justice. And they said that food ministry was not a thing, and that if I wanted to become an ordained deacon, that I really needed to come back into the confines of traditional ministry. They asked me a question about salvation, and I said, well, salvation comes for some people when they can feed their families, and they did not like that at all. And in fact, they told me that I wasn't a Christian, and then they deferred my candidacy, and it was really hurtful because I was here at Iliff, I was going through all my classes. I come from 150 years of consecutive Methodist ministry in my family, and I felt, and my dad was their boss at the time, and I felt really mad. And it really made me reevaluate whether or not I wanted to be a part of that institution. And I kind of said, well, to heck with it. I don't need their blessing. And in fact, they would probably just get in the way. And so during Iliff and for many years afterwards, I was a chef. And it was really cool. I got to work in all these super hip restaurants and make really fancy desserts. And everything was fermented and pickled and house-made. And it really fed my chef ego when I got to put out a beautiful plate of pork shoulder for $30. And at night, I would lay in bed, and there was a deep contention inside of me that I knew there were hungry people in my community, specifically in Denver. 1 out of 6 kids are hungry. So that kept me awake at night. And even with my master's degree, I applied to every single food nonprofit in Denver. And I thought my master's degree would get me to the top of that application stack, oh, she has, high education. Well, that's not true, because everyone in Denver is a good liberal with a master's degree. It just did not help me at all. And so it took me almost 3.5 years after graduation until I actually got a position in a nonprofit. And I was hired as the sous chef at Food Bank of the Rockies, and now I help run our child nutrition programs. And we serve about 3,700 kids daily after school meals, and then we do a backpack program. We feed about 5,400 kids through backpacks every week. So a massive amount of food going out. I work for the largest nonprofit in Colorado. We're even larger than United Way, given the fiscal year. And it's really fulfilling most of the time, but the nonprofit industrial complex is very real where I work. Our operations are very corporatized. I am still living paycheck to paycheck. I was told by my supervisor the other day, well, that's what you get when when you're doing this type of work, which hurt. And the place where I work, food is really institutionalized, and there's a lot of complexities around food as a commodity and in food banking and in the food distribution world. So with all that sadness, Iliff really gave me the tools to kind of stick in my place and still claim my ministry in food justice. Baking a pie is meditation to me. My worship happens when I have my friends around my kitchen table or when I get to feed somebody. Food is a way that I communicate. It's my connection with everything around me, and while it might not be traditional, I think it's really embedded in our ancestry and in our Christian roots. So I'm really grateful to Iliff for changing my life in many ways and giving me the courage to claim food justice as my ministry. And if you ever need a caterer, let me know. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to say that, but
I do. And Becca's a part of the land, so I feel like that's important to say. I love her. So I was scrolling my Instagram feed a couple weeks ago, and I came upon this 20-second video of this baby who was dressed in this really fluffy white snowsuit. She was laying face down on her stomach on this slick wooden floor, and she was moving her arms and legs as much as she could to try and get forward. For that 20-second video, in spite of all the effort that she was putting out, I think that maybe she got about half an inch forward. If I wasn't worried about copy infringement laws, I would have brought this video for you today to show you as real-time footage of what the past 5 years of my professional life have looked like. Since 2013, I have worked to develop a new faith community called The Land that works together to gather people around food, faith, and farming. And so for 5 years, I have spent every day face down on the slick wooden floor of an established institution, trying to convince people that church should be a place to explore and ask the question, what does discipleship look like in the 21st century? At the core of every physical structure on the land, we have integrated spiritual practice and agricultural ritual. An edible labyrinth, an orchard made up of 120 fruit and nut trees, an outdoor amphitheater, a greenhouse cathedral. And for 5 years, working with the City of Aurora, the Rocky Mountain Conference of the United Methodist Church, establishing a board of directors and becoming an official nonprofit in the state of Colorado, spending just over $50,000 on city fees and contractors with civil engineers, landscape architects. This today is what the land looks like. So Brene Brown has this book called Rising Strong, and when she references our life trajectories, the stories that we create, she references Pixar Animation's recipe for a successful movie. Day one, the character with wide eyes and excitement sets off on a journey to conquer the world. Day two, when nothing goes right, they find themselves at the bottom of this deep, dark hole of despair. Day three, they find a way out of the hole and they live happily ever after. So here are 3 things that I have learned during my 5-year-long period of my day 2. Lesson number 1, creativity creates chaos. When I went to the new church development team to pitch this idea of the land, I remember sitting outside of the conference room while they debated whether or not they should support an idea. And I only heard one thing, a man's voice raise and say, "She doesn't look like a farmer." To which I thought, I've been told so many times I don't look like a pastor either. When they don't know what you are, it takes a really long time for everyone to figure out what to do with you. Lesson number 2, creativity has a cost. And there are levels of risk that we need to initiate and dive into. We are so excited. But before we race out of our homes to start something new, we need to make sure that we haven't left our wallets behind. 5 years into being an associate pastor, doing the land basically on my own time, there is a realization that the cost isn't just mine, but my 9-year-old daughter who has special needs, my husband who has a mental illness. And with a clergy health insurance rate of $24,000 a year, with out-of-pocket costs coming on top of that, the question becomes, how much cost can we bear? And who's willing to show up and carry this with us? Lesson number 3, creativity requires courage. Everyone else will question you, but there will come a point early on, and it will never go away when you begin to question yourself. Last October, I sat at a table with one of the top leaders in the United Methodist Church, my eyes filled with tears, broken and depleted, saying that I couldn't do this anymore, and I didn't know what else to do. And this person offered what we all offer, the encouragement to keep going, but the reality is that in these situations, sometimes what we need to hear is not that we can keep going, but that we don't have to if we don't want to. We are climbing a mountain that we have forgotten how to climb. And what entrepreneurs and church planters need more than anything is institutional leaders who are willing to come down and partner with us and build bridges between where the institution sits and where we stand. Thank you.
You good? All right, hello. My name is Andy Millman, and I'm the Young People's Ministry Developer and Mission and Ministry Project Coordinator for the Rocky Mountain Conference. That's a whole lot of words that essentially means I coordinate all youth, young adult, and campus ministries, and I work with our Director of Mission and Ministry on other projects around the conference. When I was a seminary student at Wesley, and yes, Nick already pointed out that I'm wearing my Wesley pin today, I felt a deep call to serve the church, but also a deep call to get as far away from a Sunday morning pulpit as possible. I'm not a preacher. It's not what I do. So when Jason asked me if I'd be willing to share, I instantly started jumping through all of the projects and the kind of half-cocked ideas and failed experiments that I've been a part of with the Methodist Church over the last couple of years. I could talk about Seeds of Hope, which is what this image is from. It was an immigrant-run educational farm in CSA that I helped launch while serving as a missionary in Moscow in Russia. We use community-supported models, similar to Lady Justice, actually. And we used it to give people hands-on training on how to have a trade, how to do microfinancing, how to project a yield, how to take farming skills and be ready to set up a new business or a new way of sustaining themselves when they finally got status in country. It ran well for about a season and a half, and then the FMS, which is Russia's version of ICE, they started detaining and deporting any non-white worker, and so that kind of killed the project. I could talk about the failed multinational, multi-language pub theology and kind of social advocacy group that I tried to get off the ground in the heart of Moscow. Nothing says fun like an international jumble of expats arguing over religion and languages other than their own. Mix in a war in Ukraine, economic sanctions, and you get a really chaotic space that was a hell of a lot of fun. We never broke even financially. Almost the entire community is now gone from Moscow. And yet I had some of the most authentic conversations in that space, way more authentic than most churches have ever been in. I could talk about Crossroads, which is a failed faith community focused on solving hunger and homelessness that I helped kind of craft and lead out of the St. Luke's Mission Center in Northwest Washington, D.C. It was a transitional housing and emergency hypothermia shelter. You know, we never made our apportionments. We didn't see a whole lot of baptisms or affirmations of faith. We were not vital, according to the conference. And eventually we lost our funding. We did, however, reclaim literal tons of food from universities and campuses and restaurants around the districts. We provided hundreds of thousands of hot meals to communities of color and seniors and low-income families. And as I went through this mental list, the thing that stuck out to me the whole time is that there are a lot of failures that I'm honored and incredibly proud to have been a part of. You see, I've noticed that at that intersection of social justice and the entrepreneurial spirit, there lives a tension. You have to be deeply committed to a cause and a societal change bigger than yourself, while simultaneously having the flexibility and space to let things fail and to be okay with it. Now, I was really lucky to have advisors and mentors during my seminary studies who exposed me to ideas and thinkers that don't always get covered in a traditional theology classroom. They taught me to look at Bonhoeffer alongside Latin American-based communities, to look at N.T. Wright's Christology next to Howard Thurman. They showed me with their own lives as a lived example what it means to pursue justice in ways that are sustainable and that break free from cycles of dependence. I just lost my spot, sorry. What they were doing was they were leading me to social entrepreneurship without ever using that language. And so when I came on board with the Rocky Mountain Conference about 2.5 years ago, I was hired and tasked with revitalizing and developing young people's ministries for the 3 states out here that we work in. How do we get young people to come to annual conference? How do we get young people to go through confirmation? How do we get our numbers back to what they were in the 90s? These are the questions I got hit with right out of the gate. Not how can we develop ministries that meet the unique contextual needs of adolescents in the 21st century? And I made it very clear to this displeasure of some longtime youth workers and volunteers that we can't look backwards at models from the 50s and then wonder why people aren't engaging in 2018. We can't ask that question anymore. So we've made some changes. We've given the youth space to run. Instead of youth directors, we talk about sponsors and accompaniers who are helping our young folks ask the right questions even if they don't have the right answers. More importantly, we've given the youth space to experiment and to fail. Just a few months back, I had a young person approach me, wanting to start a DACA clinic at her church. She wants to take her identities as a person of faith and a person of color, and the call she feels to pursue justice, and tie them into her networking skills in her undergraduate degree that she's working on right now. She has no budget, no financial backers. She will not earn a paycheck for her work. And yet I was so excited when she came to me with this idea because she's able to see something that we often overlook. She's willing to try it, to just go out and do it, and be okay with failure if that's what comes out of it. You know, I'm running out of time now, and so I want to leave you with one last thought from a public theologian by the name of Kester Bruin, who truly lives into that title. He is a primary math school teacher in Britain, and yet he writes books about philosophy and theology and postmodern critical theory in his spare time. Bruin talks about how we are in the business of embalming dead trees. We're surrounded on all sides in this great forest of ideas, but we are so preoccupied with fear and self-preservation that we prevent new life from springing forth. We claim to want a radical, just reorientation of the world, and yet we erect shrines to dead things and act surprised when nothing new grows. So if you take nothing away from my talk right now, the other talks you've heard this morning, please hear this. A socially entrepreneurial spirit is dead if it does not have space to fail and to let new things grow. Thanks for your time.
When I came in, I said, and for those of you that know me, know this is true, I can't even say hello in 4 minutes. So I'm going to set a stopwatch here and see how that goes so I can keep myself on track. I am Mary Beth Taylor. I'm the founder and pastor of Open Space, which has chapters in Littleton, Colorado, as well as Ontario, California, and soon to be Denver, Colorado. Today, I am the possibility of courage, vulnerability, risk, and freedom and ease. And today, I start the day with this possibility, and every day I start the day with the possibility so that I can remind myself that out of nothing, I can come forward with a possibility that frees me and enlivens me. And I've done this for the last 6 months. Working with Open Space, I've realized that vulnerability is a key to the ministry and the life that I live through Open Space and my entire life. I've been a church planter for 18 months. I was in youth ministry. I was assigned and appointed to a large church as the associate pastor. I looked the part. I came to worship on Sunday in a suit and high heels, always makeup, always hair done, and really realizing as I moved into church planting in the last 18 months that that doesn't, no pun intended, but suit me anymore. Really, I realized more and more as I stepped into church planting that there were things that I put on as maybe a shield or as armor or as a way to look like I have it all together. And so if you could flash back with me a year ago, as a new church planter, you would have found me in my living room, binge watching Dexter or The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in my pajamas. It was really a crash and burn 6 months for me as I didn't really know what to do with myself. I didn't go to a church building anymore like I had for almost 20 years. I didn't know how to work from my home. I didn't know how to raise money. I didn't know how to network in an entrepreneurial sense. And so in the last year, I have really reached out to different people and done more and more entrepreneurial education. I've even started my own business so that I could be out networking and getting to know people in different settings than what I was used to, having worked and grown up in a United Methodist Church. And so in the last month and the last 6 months, vulnerability has really been a key to me because putting on a show or acting like I have it all together really was not working for me. And every day I have to get up and start fresh again with a new possibility and realize that vulnerability is a key piece to that. And I also have a quote from Brene Brown. Most people believe vulnerability is weakness, but really vulnerability is courage. And we must ask ourselves, are we willing to show up and be seen? And it's difficult when your life's falling apart and you have one of your lead team members say, if you could only just be like so-and-so where you used to be the pastor, and me saying back to that person in tears, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do this so much that I'm going to go to the doctor to talk about ADD and get on ADD medicine because I can't keep my life together. Some days it's hard to just get out of bed. So with that, I'm thankful that I have a spouse who has an incredibly well-paying job, because without him, I couldn't be a bivocational minister. I'm half-time, and I have to find out each year how to make enough money to make ends meet in that half-time appointment, as well as keeping my marriage healthy, because we argue about money a lot, and for us to change our whole lives together. So I really relate a lot to what Stephanie is talking about, that it connects with all points of our lives. And so this vulnerability part is showing up for me and realizing that in some of the most vulnerable moments in open space, I've had a gentleman that has been suicidal his whole entire life tell me that because of a prayer and a conversation that we have, that he doesn't want to kill himself anymore. Because of meeting people in open space and having people give her a chance, there's another young woman that didn't kill herself. And so you see here the rainbow flag, and I also put behind the open space symbol, and also Be the Change You Want to See in the World by Gandhi, because I've realized that if I'm going to be true to who I am, then I need to show up strong for each one of these individuals, and it's important for me as an ally to show up for LGBTQ people. And so I've realized that also being vulnerable, that it's time for me to move forward with the vision of starting an open space in Denver that is primarily led and attended by LGBTQ people, whether the Methodist Church likes that or not, and that I can't live or do ministry in any other way at this point. So those are my words today, and I'm going to continue to just be the most, live out my possibility and be that vulnerable, creative, courageous person who lives with risk. And I will do my very best, because if we look at Jesus, his greatest act was carrying the cross through the city streets and then dying on it in front of everyone, which was seen as the world as a failure. But that is the greatest risk and the greatest vulnerability that we can each live by. Thanks.
Speakers up front. We're going to do a quick set change and bring up some chairs. I was watching some of the reactions from the audience, and I think you got that we asked them to be honest and hear some hard truths, some joys, but some hard truths. And for me, my hope is that we can have a conversation about how do we do this differently, and how do we truly support the reformation of the church that we're going through right now. We are blessed to have students in our seminaries and theological schools that are being called to do Christ's work in the world, to lead justice efforts, and to do things a little differently. We also have students called to do parish ministry and congregational ministry. But we can't miss this opportunity to feed and support and to walk alongside those who are called to totally reimagine what it means to do ministry in the world. So, I'm going to run the mic. If you have a question, raise your hand, and I'll ask you to speak into the mic because we're recording, and that's the only way we'll get your question. And if you have a question specifically for someone, say who it is. Otherwise, we're going to let you all in a free-for-all figure out who's the best person to answer. Yeah, always Becca, apparently. All right. Questions? And if you want to say anything about how you felt about this too, I'm sure the speakers would appreciate hearing your feedback.
Not so much a question, but an affirmation. So I'm Paul Kotke. I'm a superintendent for the Denver district of the United Methodist Church, and I have seen 6 courageous people today. And I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how the institution makes sense out of all this, but thank you for your work.
Hello. This question is for all of you, if you can answer. Firstly, thank you also for sharing with us, for truly you all encompass what it means to have entrepreneurial ministry, to do entrepreneurial ministry. But just wanted to know briefly, where does your drive come from? In order to, one, step out and take the leap of faith, to do something that is different and out of the ordinary, and what drives you every day, every morning to wake up and to continue to do what you do so well.
For 5 years.
So I love parish ministry. I actually love the business of running a church, and I feel like what drives me to do something kind of out of the box is that there are so many people that aren't connecting with the community of the church and yet have so much passion, energy, and vision for an alternative way of forming community. And so I see my drive and the drive of the members of my board as being creating something for people who don't feel as though the church is something or a place that they'd like to invest in.
I guess I'll go. For me, it's the relationships. The reality is when you live with people and spend time with people and deeply invest with each other, that is what drives me to continue doing it because I can see the impact it has. Another little piece I'll say is, so a counselor a couple years ago told me to think of the victory column and put everything you can in the victory column. So sometimes getting out of bed that day is the victory column. I did something. Sometimes I took a shower today is the victory column. Sometimes, we got a $5,000 grant as a victory column. And so it's just a way for me to constantly be seeing, how am I succeeding in this? How are we moving forward? How are we able to do this, no matter how big or how small? And so that just helps me kind of reframe how I'm thinking.
For me, I contemplated a lot this summer on those who came before me and thinking about struggle. While I may be spearheading in one particular category, I'm not the first to have struggled and will continue to struggle. I thought about the Tuskegee Airmen in our military. I thought about women in our military and the ordeals that they have gone through. And thinking about their own struggles kept me going because, again, they've done it. They had support. They made it. It is now a new normal. It's not abnormal for Black people to be serving. It's not abnormal for women to serve. And one day it won't be abnormal or look awkward for an LGBTQ chaplain. So I just keep pushing and think about what other folks have gone through before me.
I guess I'll say something. At the surface level, what drives me is literal food, like consuming food, and how much I enjoy eating with my friends and my family and people that I don't know. So, I mean, it's something that is the most basic act that we do every day, but it's transformative. Some of my best memories, service trips and learning trips and around the world, have been shared with somebody I couldn't even speak with, but we were sharing off the same plate. So literally consuming something gets me out of bed every day.
Very similar. Only I drink and you eat. Beer dinner. I have to be careful when I say that drinking drives me to things, because I do display healthy forms of beer sampling. But for me, it's kind of twofold. When Lady Justice started, nobody had done it before, and so we really had no idea what we were doing, which actually was very freeing for us. And Kate would call the state of Colorado and be like, "Is this thing that we're thinking about doing legal?" And they would be like, "Honestly, we have no idea. So just try it and see what happens." And so because of that, we've been able to just try stuff, and we get to experiment, and we get to invent things. And then because of that, we have other people come to us and they say, "I've been trying to figure out how to do this, but nobody had done it before, so I didn't know how, but you guys have." And so my goal all along, like, people always ask, like, what do you want for this thing in like 10 or 15 years down the road? And my answer is always, I want this to become a standard form of doing business. So I want social entrepreneurship in small levels, local levels, to be every shop that you pass when you walk down the street. And on the other side of it, the grants that we give out, last year we had an entire basketball team, a girls' basketball team, apply for grants, and we only had enough money to give 3 of them grants for their summer camp. And in one of the applications, like, this girl, she was maybe 14 or 15 years old, and she was talking about how she wanted to go to the basketball camp because learning basketball taught her how to be a better person in her community. So it taught her how to relate to her brother, and it taught her how to be nice to her friends. And so I'm just like, how cool is it that, like, just simply wanting to go grab a beer means that this girl gets to go to basketball camp and learn how to be a better person. So I think it's just the results turn into the motivation later on.
So Open Space just had its 4th anniversary, and we're having a big kickoff fundraiser celebration tomorrow night. And really, we're having a gentleman as our keynote speaker that is a transgender man, and it's his goal to eradicate suicide in the transgender youth community. And for me, that really says it all. If one person lives and our message can change their life, then that's why I keep doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to echo the district superintendent, a word of appreciation for your testimony here before us. I did want to ask a question. I'm with the Field Educators meeting, and I wondered if you would be willing and open to take a risk and help us offer one word or one thing in your field education experience that you thought was helpful as a social and missional entrepreneur, and maybe one thing that you would like to see that you didn't get in your contextual education. Be brave.
That one. In my seminary education, I switched my program before I had to do internship, which is actually a big motivating factor, because the idea of having to do an internship surrounding traditional forms of ministry made me feel really uncomfortable, especially going to school in the South and being a gay woman. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to have to closet myself, and I didn't want to have to be in traditional ministry. So I actually changed, and that wasn't the only reason. I love research and I love writing, and I just wanted to write a freaking thesis, and it's like the nerdiest thing to be excited about, but I still get really excited about it. And so I changed my program. So, like, I would say, and I know that this happens quite a bit at Iliff, so it might happen in your schools, but being able to give students the opportunity to do field education in a way that really makes them thrive would have been so helpful for me. Yeah.
Piggyback onto that, because Betsy and I went to school together, and what changed my life is this lady. And so, community, really. Gosh, I'm just very verklempt today. I'm going to take one of my worst fears is like looking stupid or sounding stupid. Okay, so I'm breathing. And so Betsy was in my community at Perkins, and several other key people who were not afraid to have a feminist voice and not afraid to really be authentic. And that community, I can never, for us, like, I think it was just spirit-led moment that we were all there at the right time in the right place. God led us to each other. And so definitely, I think what could be offered is, until I did my own personal reading class with Elaine Heath and started learning about missional church and missional wisdom, and then went through that program, I had no clue. And I read her book, Missional Way of Evangelism. Oh, you said one or two words, didn't you? Sorry. And it talked about bivocational ministry, and that just made me want to vomit. And now here I am doing it. But it made me want to vomit so much that I couldn't forget it. And it was inspiring and exciting, and so that entrepreneurial, those opportunities to see things that don't look traditional.
I guess I'll go. Something that I've seen at a lot of seminaries, I talk with a lot of young people just by the nature of my job, and I'm networked with folks across the country. But both in seminaries and also with the appointment process, oftentimes young folks are told, we don't ordain into extension ministries, or we do not do field education in that way. And so instead of trying to create a space to nurture call and to respond to what students and young people are saying and what they feel called to do, a lot of times we go back to models that we're comfortable with and that we know. And we don't always create that space to look forward and to allow them to truly live into that call. And so as a field educator or somebody coordinating those programs, asking students a question, where are you feeling called and how can we make this work, rather than nobody applied or nobody wants an intern or nobody has that space and so we can't help you. That'd be my short response.
I would echo my colleagues and also say the compassionately question. There were times also I felt boxed in to pastoral ministry when I wasn't ready, speaking also from the context of a queer body where the church, I've been hurt by the church. I've come to a point in my life where I've now feel comfortable going back into churches and seeing the rich support that they can provide to their communities, but it has taken time for me to journey there. And in the beginning of my internship process, I wasn't ready to go right into a church. So fortunately, it got to a point with our OPF office where they just asked the questions and listened and heard my story to figure out, well, what's going on? Where are you coming from? And there was a lot of patience in there. So yeah, compassionately question and hear their stories is what I would offer.
I'm trying to remember, so I feel horrible, but it's been 11 years since I graduated from Iliff, and my husband and I went to seminary together. We started at Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School in Rochester, New York, and then finished at Iliff. And the one thing that just keeps cropping up in my mind is how much I wanted to be a pastor of a church, to preach and visit people, and it's just what I wanted. And being placed in these settings where I just never really had the opportunity to do anything other than working with the children, office filing, things like that. And my husband's experience being completely different, and always being so jealous and telling him, because his call wasn't to lead a parish setting. And so, and not only that, but he's the pastor, or he's the pastor's kid. And so he like definitely didn't want it, and it was handed so easily to him. And it was something that I hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure how to deal with. And now looking back, I realize all sorts of things playing into that, such as gender, age, the way I look, how young I look, and maybe having somebody to kind of coach me through those things and become more aware of how to respond with authority. I think that it has taken me 8 years out of seminary to kind of get a handle on it and start to figure it out. But what I learned was to adapt, that whatever they gave me, whatever scraps I was handed, that I was going to be able to create something out of it. And I feel like that has kind of been the tapestry of my resume to this point. So.
Are there more questions?
My name is Michelle Watkins. I'm on faculty here at Iliff, and it is a pleasure to be here, to hear your testimonies and to hear your journey. I've been teary-eyed for probably about 20 minutes, along with you, Stephanie. So we're all in the love train as we're feeling the spirit. My question is, who are you mentoring? You know, as we think about instituting social entrepreneurship into perpetuity, and even as I am thinking about the apostolic ministry, the ministry of the apostles, and to a large degree was entrepreneurship in a number of ways. Who are you mentoring? Who do you see around you in your life that you feel particularly called to nurture and help develop their natural gifts and graces toward social entrepreneurship ministries?
This is actually something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I credit it to the fact that it's probably one of my deepest needs, and so then it's the thing I'm most motivated to give. And so outside of anything that has to do with the land, I think the biggest blessing out of any of the work we do as pastors is being able to see people when they're showing up and to encourage them to keep going. Because I think that for women, for people who have visions of things in alternative ways, it's easy to feel as though you're shut down. And so to kind of be that voice of, no, like, you can do this, keep going. Well, have you thought about doing it this way? And so over the past 4 months, I've had 5 younger people come and say they're interested in church planting, and it's been interesting for me to have to do the work of setting aside my own pain and relationship with that and clearing space for them to say, okay, well, what does that look like? And what do you need to be able to do it? Because one of the hardest things, and I'm not sure if anyone here can relate to this, is that there are specific things that we need, like resources, advocates, and people are really willing to say, oh, that's great, you're so courageous, but who's willing to stand up and say, okay, this is what you need, and you can't move forward unless you have this. It's not realistic, and so I'm going to help you get this. And so kind of, I feel like my own need for that has been such a gift in seeing that in other people. Well, I know how it feels to not have that, and so to sit with people and say, oh, that's not right, let's do it this way. Like, because you deserve more. Just because you're creative, you're doing something different, being labeled as courageous isn't enough. You need financial resources and credibility behind you to get anything done.
For me, I think it's important for me to show up for the other church planters. We have a monthly gathering that Stephanie and I are in, and some other church planters in the Rocky Mountain Conference and Yellowstone Conference, to show up strong for them so that we can be supportive of each other. And then also, I'm getting training and coaching so that I can know how to ask the challenging questions and not put what I want on somebody else, but really see where God is calling them, so people can really thrive at what they're called to do.
That question gets me so excited. It really does, because coming from a military context, I mean, a decade of my life was in that environment, and there's no way that a system like that can survive without constantly taking care of the folks behind you, because you're not going to be in that role forever, as I'm here, not there where I was, right? So that's always been embedded in me, to always, you care for your people, you pass the mantle, you train your folks, because I did not get here alone. I'm standing on folks' shoulders, right, who have supported me along the journey, and God willing will continue to support me. Oh, it's so exciting, that question. Yeah. I'm a part of an independent student organization here, even at my, here at Iliff. And written in our job descriptions of our leadership roles is you mentor the next. It doesn't matter if you're the president, vice president, secretary, all the way down to our chaplain. The last sentence is always you mentor the next. And we cannot sustain as a community if we're not looking to take care of the folks that are coming in our footsteps.
So kind of bouncing off of that, I'm going to plug a program in the Methodist Church. It's called the Global Mission Fellows Program. It's a 2-year opportunity. It's what took me to Russia, and so I was mentored by other young people who had learned how to organize, how to do the work on the ground. And that helped form my identity and who I am now, and taught me how to do these things. And now I've had the opportunity to help train other cohorts, so train other young people who are going out to serve, who are doing these kind of justice projects all over the globe. And that kind of model where you have that chain, people helped me and I'm helping and passing it on. And that's why this program that's been around since the 50s or 60s is still going strong and has 144 young people serving around the globe. So for me, I'm mentoring young people who are interested and kind of feel a call but don't know, and helping give that little push to take that next step.
I'm going to be very honest and say that I am mentoring no one in my role right now. That's just not the nature of my position where I am now. If I didn't mention earlier, I work in a very corporatized nonprofit, and I am stuck at the level I am stuck at until someone retires, and there's not a lot of mobility. And unfortunately, I just don't have a community around me to play that role. It's not that I'm unwilling. I would love to, but it's just not the nature of my work right now.
I'm a little bit like Becca. I don't have anybody that I'm actively mentoring or seeking out. I will say, though, that I gave a talk last month on the very strong prevalence of sexual assault and harassment in the brewing world. And after that happened, I've had a number of young female brewers reach out and basically just say, like, how do you work in an industry that's male-dominated? And how do you work in an industry where people have 2 or 3 beers and feel they can say or do whatever they want with you? And so I guess the way I see my role in that is just encouraging young women who want to work in the brewing industry, who want to become brewers, to just say, you can do this, and women can be leaders in the brewing industry, and they are in Colorado. There are a lot of amazing women who are pushing the envelope in the brewing world in Colorado and demanding respect from their male colleagues. And so just being a part of that and just being able to say, like, hey, you matter and we see you, and the work that you do is good, and come brew with us. We're a safe space to brew into. So we have some guest brewers stop by every once in a while just to hang out and chat.
So I'll take one more question. Okay, I'll take 2 if everyone's willing to stay. I want to add to what was just said. It's a great question on mentorship, and I've seen almost everyone on the panel here mentor in a variety of other ways, and part of that is just standing in the space that they occupy and speaking to justice in what they do. And we have referred other people when people ask us about things like, I'm interested in this, I'm like, ooh, talk to this person, talk to Becca Boone. You're interested in food, right? Like the networking and relational piece, whether it's ongoing mentorship. And Candise is our go-to Air Force chaplain. We have all of a sudden just acquired a variety of students that are interested. I'm like, do you know Candise? So part of that is the collegial relationships.
Thank you each for your presentations, very moving and very inspiring. Perkins School of Theology, where I am a field educator, is having a new concentration on social entrepreneurship. And Chuck and I are tasked on putting together competencies for the field education component of that curriculum. So my question, I'm getting some ideas, but I don't want to just assume that I've got the right ideas, but I want to ask you. As we have to put that together, what would be some competencies that you think would be important for us to think about in terms of spiritual practices for people who have a calling into social entrepreneurship to give them safe spiritual passage? What would be some important theological questions to ask them when they have to write those theological reflection papers? I think we need to make those a little different, where they're integrating their biblical and theological courses with what they're actually doing. What is a skill set, what are some skills that they need to start practicing, right, to become a social entrepreneurship? One of the things that really clicked from what y'all were, just from all the testimonies, one of the things that I wrote down, that I feel like this program will definitely need intensive mentoring, where you meet other social entrepreneurs and talk to each other. So bring in people like yourselves to network. But those are those three questions. What would you say about what would be the important theological questions for them to try to think and reflect as they integrate their theological studies? What would be the way that you would think would be spiritual practice that might be helpful for people in this kind of setting, for it to help them? So.
So the first thing that comes to mind is the work that and experiences I've had with the Center for Courage and Renewal with Parker Palmer, and the discernment process that's incorporated into that, and then the spiritual practices that come out of that have been very powerful and actually have inspired what I do for the majority of my full-time job as an appointed pastor of Hope